So one of the big questions I've gotten about the upcoming Egypt tour and seminar is what's going to be on the curriculum itself? What are we going to be studying? Of course, we're going to be visiting Giza, the Osiris Shaft. We're going to get private access to the Coptic Museum where the Nag Hammadi Library is, and even into the access of the Pyramid of Unas, literally standing in the oldest sustained religious text in the world. We'll be visiting the center of the cult of Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus, among so many other grand and marvelous adventures. But what are we going to be studying? The trip centers around four key values for me: profound experiential experience, deep reflection, building community, and intellectual flourishing for everyone on the trip. And I want to say a little bit about that last value as the period of time for which we can actually register for the trip is coming to an end. The value of intellectual flourishing. At this point, I'm still building the curriculum. In fact, I'm beginning to build in the first phase of participant involvement pretty soon, and I want to share how things are kind of shaping up so you get some idea of what we'll be discussing and learning about on the trip. But at the core of the journey is a focus on ancient mystical technologies of spiritual ascent. How the Egyptian world, in all of its complexity through time, has provided the world, frankly, with a range of theories and practices for the exaltation of the human soul, the human mind, and the human spirit. And to attempt to do any justice to that vast amount of literature, in just the 12 nights that we'll have together on the trip while we're in Egypt, we're going to be diving deeply, deeply into the scholarship and primary literature concerning those very technologies of mystical ascent. Of course, we'll begin our intellectual journey with the foundational text, the pyramid text, composed over 4,000 years ago, by which the soul is transformed into an eternal being, the Ach, and then propelled into the starry afterlife. The Egyptian genius in the development of the soul was then, of course, transmitted via philosopher mystics like Pythagoras, himself, said to have studied and developed these concepts while he was educated by priests in Egypt. I mean, the Pythagorean theorem is kind of a thing. He was into triangles, so unsurprisingly, Egypt. However, that's all going to be developed into the wider world primarily in the Platonic tradition. And that tradition, while it was born in Athens, would come back to flourish in its native Egyptian homeland. And here the traditions associated with the ascent of the soul scatter, as if through a vast Kemetic prism. The lights thrown by that Kemetic prism will be the subject of most of our intellectual work. Among the early encounters are directly with the secret text of the Egyptian priesthood, in their own words actually, translated as the Conversations in the House of Life. We'll explore these extremely esoteric and frankly difficult documents that survive from the very priests of Thoth, and we'll be visiting the tomb of one of the high priests of that god of magic, writing, and the moon. Of course, the priests of Thoth would also pioneer that most famous salvific philosophical spirituality of Hermeticism, and we'll explore the Hermetic literature together in the very seat of the cult of Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus at Hermopolis. But rival to that spirituality, of course, were the Gnostics, who produced in many ways the first true theologians of all of, Christianity. The first true theologians of Christianity with exclusive access to the Coptic Museum, the very storehouse for the treasure that is the Nag Hammadi Library. Will unpack the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Thomas, the Secret Book of John, the Apocryphon of John, and I think my favorite and many of your favorites out there, Thunder Perfect Mind, in the very presence of those manuscripts. The teachings of the Alexandrian school, like those of Ammonius Saccas, who would become the teacher of Plotinus, would also lay the foundations for what we now call Neoplatonism and the system of things like spiritual procession and recession, emanation, spiritual exaltation, and theurgy, all developed in Egypt by luminaries like Iamblichus. This has all become fundamental to the philosophy and spirituality of Western esotericism. Of course, also the great Hermetic arts of astrology, alchemy, and magic were fundamentally forged in the land of the black soil. Thus, we'll explore the magic of the Greek magical papyri, especially with a focus on the akephalos ritual that becomes the bornless ritual, and modern contemporary magic, the alchemy of Zosimus of Panopolis, Cleopatra and Maria Hebrea, but also the foundations of the Wheel of Fate that became Western astrology. Alexandria also brings us into contacts with strands of the earliest and also the most mature forms of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, from Philo of Alexandria to the mystics of the Merkava, and to that greatest, arguably, of all Kabbalists, Isaac Luria, who developed the Kabbalah as we know it on mystical retreats to the Nile over the course of 7 years. All of this and so much more of the vast library of mysticism and magic born from Egypt. I can't really express how much material we're going to dive into, nor can I communicate how profoundly deep that material is, but I can say that as much as we'll be immersed in the land and the place of Egypt physically, will also be equally immersed intellectually in the spiritual and philosophical riches that great land has birthed. Nearly daily seminars, study groups, reflections, and ongoing discussions will connect us with the land, with the past, and with each other as a community of seekers, both for spiritual benefit, but also for intellectual flourishing. And I'm going to be doing my absolute best as an educator to make sure that everything we cover on the trip will be as intellectually accessible and inviting as it will be rigorous and grounded in scholarship. I don't want anyone to be intimidated, and I'm going to do my utmost to engage everyone from the curious novice, but also challenge the amazingly learned people that I know are attending this trip already. But I'm going to be building up the syllabus now in the next few weeks. I'm going to be putting together a textbook that we'll have on the trip, and we're going to have our first preliminary readings and our first meetings. Yes, meetings, digital online meetings, months before we gather together in Egypt. I want to build that sense of community now, so that when we get to the ground, we're actually already in a kind of communion. For folks that can't make it, I'm going to make all of that material accessible to you as well for self-study. Educational accessibility is, of course, one of the core values here at Esoterica, and I'm going to extend that as much as I can to everyone who can't make it on this trip this time. But all that said, we only have a few more spots, a handful of more spots on the second trip. The first one totally sold out, and so we're making a second trip happen, and registration is closing this week, October 10th. October 10th, this Thursday. So if you want to study and immerse yourself in the ancient technology of the spiritual ascent among the vast grandeur that is Egypt, check out the details below to register. It's going to be first come, first serve. And like I said, there are only a few spots left, and registration is closing on October 10th. Also, I'm even extending the early bird discount, $500 off the tuition until that deadline, because I want to make sure that anyone can go that can. That, and I honestly don't know when I'm going to be doing another one of these tours in Egypt in the near future at all, frankly. So this is kind of your last chance to join me in what I truly believe is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime journey. So here's to hoping that I can see you in Egypt, studying Western esotericism, where it was born and where it flourished.